Hey guys, I'd like to welcome Daniel Greenfield. He's a personal trainer, he's a nutritional coach, and he's also a certified Wim Hof instructor. He's going to be speaking to us tonight. And Daniel, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you guys for showing up here today. Kind of a little of the wisdom that Ed shared with us prior to jumping on was kind of just that manageable, actionable items that we could do every day to kind of determine how our life turns out, right? If we view the full duration of our life, right? It kind of seems like what we do today doesn't matter, right? Because I mean, there's going to always be tomorrow or the next or a year from now or this from now. But really, all life is just one moment stacked upon the other, right? And so this moment for me is really special because I get to sit in front of you and talk about something I love, right? Which is cold water and me. But no, I'm talking. So pretty much it's going to be about the cold water today. I prepared a deck for you guys. If Ed could allow the participants to share the screen. If you could go down to like the bottom toggle and just allow multiple participants, I'll be able to share my screen and get into the presentation.
Okay, you should be able to do it now.
All right, great. So, all right, everyone with me? Good. All right, so let's start the show. So, this presentation today is going to be primarily on cold water immersion and using it as a tool for transformation, right? There's many different tools in the craftsman's toolbox, right? That could get the job done. And this is one of those tools, right? That is really valuable and I believe anecdotally has truly changed my life. So many paths, right? One mountain. We're all trying to just get to the top. So awesome. That's me there in the corner. And I'll be having a little more, all the pictures available too. So a little bit about me, right? My story. Ed gave you a beautiful background. So currently, I'm a certified personal trainer. I've been working in the health and wellness industry for 10 plus years. Currently now as well, doing some public speaking, literally. So public speaker as well, and then I do other invitations that I get here from time to time, and also in workshops that I conduct not only for corporations and companies like Ed's that we did down in Hanover, Pennsylvania, but also just coordinate on my own with friends, family, and anyone else who wants to join. And then lastly, of course, like transformation coach, I have there. So coaching my clients towards transformative goals and really working together to get past those sticking points in our lives that we don't believe we are capable of moving past. But truly, once we get out of our minds and into our bodies, we remember who we are and we know what we're capable of. So that's kind of the background of my professional history and some of my personal history as well is obviously right starting from the beginning with the cold, right? My mother, she's from Sweden, so I'm a Swedish citizen, and Nordic countries it's very common to expose yourself to the cold in different ways. So if you guys probably seen like some videos online or maybe social media about how Swedish or Norwegian mothers leave their children out, like their babies in the carriage outside during the wintertime. That's a true thing, right? They're doing that all the time out there. Even for me, you know, growing up in New York and then going back and seeing like, oh, wow, I did that. You guys did that. It's like a little bit of a culture shock, but it has shown to be extremely beneficial in many different ways, which I'll get into. And that's kind of how my life started with the cold, right? At first, it was just kind of cultural, right? Um, so doing like sauna as well as going on to the cold and then kind of going back and forth, really short duration immersions, I would say, and which turned into always, as my mother said, turning the shower cold after to end the shower, right? So even if you do your hot water with the toiletries and body wash and all that, you still should always end with the cold, right? So even from a young age, I was taught that. And really at first, it would just kind of grew into something I enjoyed as a challenge. Because as a former athlete, as well. That's kind of some of the mindset that comes into that. But then after my athletic career ended after college, I was kind of searching a little bit for that purpose, right? That feeling that you get when you overcome a challenge. And I think we all know how rewarding that could be, right? And that led me to learning about the Wim Hof method. And my father, right, was a yogi and a breathwork instructor in, like, this is back 80s and 90s, right? So a long time ago, before yoga was even a household name. So I also grew up being exposed to that. He would invite me to do yoga with him, and he always said that true yoga was breath, right? And so from a young age, I was exposed to that culture as well. And it led me to coming to the Wim Hof method in this weird ways where I kind of felt like I had known it my whole life, but just didn't know why or how or the structure of it. And when I read a book called On the Day on Your Life, I read about Wim Hof method, right? I tried it for the first time, and it was truly something that I have never felt before in my life. And it was just a practice that kind of cascaded from a habit to a behavior, right? Like Ed said, you kind of start with just one time, however it is, and if you stick with it, right, and you keep going and you stay committed to it, it just becomes a part of you. And that's how the journey with me began with the Wim Hof method and cold exposure, especially. And this is back in 2018, and it grew as just a practitioner, right? Just doing it on my own. It was really helpful for me during the pandemic to really have something that grounded me. And then that led me to wanting to become a certified instructor, where I trained with Wim and the Wim Hof Academy in Spain in last year. So in February 2023, after completing an online course for 6 months. So that kind of has led me to where I am today and sitting in front of you talking about cold water, right? And the beautiful benefits. So that's a little my story. And now let's get into the juicy details. So some of the talking points that I'll be working on today is going to be first and foremost principles of the Wim Hof method, which I'll be going over just mostly on the surface level, and then going into kind of the distinct characteristics of cold water immersion and what makes it different than, say, other cold exposure practices like cryotherapy. Also talk about stress, right, in our lives and the principle of hormesis, which I'll get into more of what that means if you're not familiar with that. And then ending with a really simple, actionable 3-step process to cold exposure, specifically cold water immersion, right? And the ice baths and all those things, and how to prepare and what you should be doing during the experience, and also how to recover and conclude it as well. And then ending with just a goal-oriented approach to cold water immersion, right? Always, as we know, we have that plan in place, right? We take the steps we know we could take. We're going to get there. If we're just kind of bopping around in the wind, we're subject to external, right, influences and environments pushing us to where it wants to go. So, all right. So starting with the 3 pillars of the Wim Hof method, the 3 pillars start with number 1 being breath work, right? So what you're doing during Wim Hof method specific breath work is you're alternating states of hypoxia and hyperoxia. What that means is we are fluctuating the levels of oxygen in our blood, right? The saturation. So when we are in the active portion of the breath work, right, we are increasing our oxygen saturation, right, which would be considered hyperoxia, right? And certain sensations or symptoms you may feel is kind of tingling, right, almost like twitching or uncontrollable muscle contractions. That's due to the increased levels of oxygen in our blood. And then you also have hypoxia, right? And that's during the breath holds. So when you're not breathing, right? So you have saturated that oxygen level, right? And then as we're holding our breath for pretty much like whatever the standard is, or as long as we can, that oxygen level is going down, right? And our carbon dioxide level is going up. And so that's the kind of the reason for what I would say creating states of non-ordinary consciousness, right? Is the play of gases in our blood. That's really causing the experience that you're having. And if any of us have done breath work before, we know it could be very profound, right? And almost wow, like unbelievable type of experience that you produce within yourself, which is totally empowering to know that we are capable of creating that change inside ourselves. So that's kind of the breath work, right? And obviously I could dive deeper in the specifics of the, what to do and the mechanics, but today we're talking more about cold exposure. So at the end, if you have more questions, I'd love to answer. And so obviously the second pillar is cold exposure. So using cold exposure as a tool for inner transformation and healing, right? So why we use the cold, it emboldens, right, our mental strength. It's like a challenge that we have to overcome. It's never easy. That water is always going to be cold no matter how many times you do it, right? That temperature, if it's the same, it doesn't change. It's going to feel the same for you every time you go in, but you adapt quicker, right, over time. It's kind of like the principle of hormesis, which I'll get into more, but exposing ourselves to that small amount of stress leads to great physiological adaptations. And especially with the cold, I'll be going into more benefits very shortly. And the third pillar of the Wim Hof method is mindset and commitment. So this is kind of like what I like to call the key that unlocks the code. Right? This is the why of the hows of breathwork and cold exposure. The why is our mindset, right? That's going to really be the big game changer for us, and where we're going to really see, I believe, our greatest benefit. And really, what it is doing to our mindset is like kind of like what Ed said with the can and can't, right? Exactly like Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you are right. That's it, right? That's what it comes down to, is whether we have belief in self, right? That number one. And then number two, that we actually have the courage to try, right? Because even though a lot of times you hear, oh, yeah, I know you people, I could do it, right? Even we tell ourselves, I could do that, right? I believe I could do that, but have we ever tried, right? No, because we might get let down for those expectations that we build up for ourselves, right? And that's painful, and we don't want to do that. But that's where the real growth happens, right? In that zone of uncomfortability. And that for me has been the biggest difference of all in this journey, has just been my mindset, right? How I approach my days now. When I start my day with a cold ice bath in the morning, it's winter time, right? We're going outside. Last thing you want to do after getting out of that warm bed, right, and maybe cuddling with your partner under the sheets is get your butt into the cold water. But that's going to be the best thing for you. And I can tell you from my own experience, right? Nobody's perfect. So days that I don't do my cold bath in the morning, it's like night and day. Like the way that how I feel, my energy, how I show up, everything is different just from that aspect. So I think commitment, right? Because we all know it's not going to happen overnight. All it does, it only takes one time to feel the difference, but it's going to take more than one time to sustain the difference, right? And to really make it into a permanent behavioral change and something that is just a part of you, right? As we know, it's like they say, it takes at least 66 days, right, to go from a habit to a behavioral change. And so really getting into the practice of doing it more than once, right? And I would say trying to incorporate it into your life at least once a week, right, is going to kind of be your minimum effective dose of these benefits of how they last, and then it will kind of recede back to your normal state if you don't do it once a week. So once a week is the goal. All right. Moving on from the Wim Hof method. So now, specifically, just cold water and the benefits, right? So with cold water, pretty much where that temperature begins is going to be right around, they say, the 16 degrees Celsius, which equates to around 61, 62 degrees Fahrenheit. So I just put there 59 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Under 60 is you're more than safe, right? You know that's going to be enough to make the difference that you need, right? So cold water immersion begins at pretty much 59 degrees, right, and below. Some of the benefits that we can expect to receive, number one, is going to be reduced muscle soreness, right? So that's why athletes have practiced with this modality for years already. Number one, most likely because it is going to increase our endocannabinoids and endogenous opioids that we produce. So it's going to be a pain reliever. So we're going to feel less pain. Number two, what it's doing is, like it says in the second bullet, it's going to accelerate our muscle recovery. So it's going to, they've done studies that post ice bath immersion, you have 4 times higher rate of muscle protein synthesis. So what muscle protein synthesis is basically the process of where your body takes the protein it eats, right, converts it into amino acids, and then the amino acids have to get into the muscle, right? And that's muscle protein synthesis, is getting the amino acids into the muscle, rebuilding it, right, and building up stronger. Because as we know, when we do exercise, right, we're not really building muscle, we're breaking it down, and then we're building up on the recovery side. So that's going to accelerate that process. Right. Number three is going to cool you down fast, right? If you're ever overheated, hot summer day, right, that ice bath is going to work like in a second, it feels like. So there's yeah, it's the quickest thing you could, quickest medicine you could serve, I always say. That's the way I like to see it. Number four being a boosted immune system. So how does it do that? In studies with Wim specifically, they measured his blood levels post ice bath for up to 6 days, and it showed that from exposure into the cold, right, cold water immersion, to up to 6 days, he had an elevated level of white blood cells. So as we know, white blood cells are that immune fighting cells we have in our body, right? It's going to protect us from pathogens and invaders and things that get into us, and is going to really keep us safe. So having an elevated level of white blood cells obviously is going to boost our immune system, right, and keep us healthy. So that's one of the major ways it does that. Calms inflammation, right? Has an amazing anti-inflammatory effect. This has kind of been, I would say, the widest studied benefit that it has been with the inflammatory process. So specifically speaking, if you ever looked into Wim's story as well. They talk about the Radboud study, which was a study, the first study that kind of made him into who he is, where they injected, in a controlled study, of course, injected him with an endotoxin called E. coli, right? Pretty bad stuff that made him obvious, everyone sick, right? And you would normally experience symptoms like headaches, nausea, shakes, right? Muscle soreness, all this really tough fever like symptoms. And with Wim, during the study, he was practicing his breath work, right? At 30 minutes before the injection, and then up to 2 hours into the experiment. And what it showed was for the first time in history that we have control over our inflammation, right? And the cold and the breath work together to do that. And what it does is it decreases our inflammatory markers like interleukin and increases our anti-inflammatory markers like interleukin 10, right? So it really works with a lot of cool stuff to keep your inflammation down. Improves your mood. For me, this is my favorite benefit. So what it's going to do is going to increase the dose hormones, right? Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins all are going to exponentially increase during cold water immersion. Specifically speaking, dopamine is going to, has been observed, right, through studies to increase up to 250%, right? That's a lot. So in comparison to, say, drugs, as we know, like cocaine, which has been shown to boost up to 1.9%, right, times, so higher than normal levels. Um, Cold water is going to do that, more of that, right? And also, too, it's going to, you're not going to have the same crash, right? The addiction is not that physical. And also, too, it's going to last longer, right? It's going to be like a 2 hour elevation of that dopamine rather than that 10-minute hit, right? So it's like, that's why I always say it's the cleanest, purest medicine you could serve. And then for as well, right? Obviously, endorphins, we know like that runner high, right? So you're feeling really great. Dopamine also works on our motivation systems. When we increase our dopamine, we get really motivated, right? We're gonna approach other aspects of our lives with that same fire and passion. So that's what it really does, especially if you do it in the morning. You like feel like the rest of the day you're just owning it, which is a really amazing feeling. And then obviously too, it's going to increase your metabolic rate, right? So it's going to increase your adrenaline, right? So you're going to feel like very energized. You're going to also increase your heat, right? Because when you're in the cold, right, it's dropping your core body temperature. So your body has to work harder to raise its temperature, right? So that's how it's going to increase your metabolic rate. Things are going to start firing, right? You're going to get into that kind of fight or flight um, state, right, of our sympathetic nervous system, which is going to increase our metabolic rate, right? Increase our heart rate safely, right? Where we can control that as well, and do many different things that are going to help us, like helping burn fat and calories, right? Well, who doesn't want that? So how that works on the burning fat, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I'll say just something about that now, is that what it's doing, right, is it's been shown that your body, right, is going to activate when you get in the cold your intercostal muscles as well as your brown fat, right? And as we know, we have brown fat and white fat. So what brown fat does is its main purpose is to use glucose, right, and other white fat that's stored in the body as energy to be converted into heat, right? So it's basically, it's like a furnace. So it's taking up all that blood glucose that's in there. It's using the white fat storages that you have, and the brown fat is turning that into heat, right? And the intercostal muscles are being innervated where it's having this involuntary muscle action that's causing a tremendous raise in our metabolic levels and increasing our core temperatures, right, to stay stable when we're in that cold environment. So obviously there's so many benefits, but these are kind of the ones that really stick out to me and I'd like for you to take with you. So moving on from there, right? Characteristics of cold water exposure that makes it distinct from other methods. So beginning here, right? You have on the left side, we have the cold shock. So the cold shock is triggered by signals from cutaneous thermoreceptors that cause specific responses to the cold water. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that we have little antennas, right, or like kind of receptors on our in our skin, right, that is monitoring temperature and is going to react to that difference, right? And you could certainly get some of that from, say, like cold air, right? But that's going to take much, much longer. Where right away, that cold water is going to trigger that cold shock. That right? If you know if you've done that, right? Ice bath, especially your first time, that's kind of going to be your first reaction. Is like, oh my god, what's happening? But that's okay. That's normal. Other things that are happening, right? Tachycardia means an increased heart rate, right? So right away, you're going to feel like you're in that state of stress. This is good stress. You're going to, like I said, that respiratory gasping. You're going to feel like you're gasping for air. Hyperventilation, right? You're going to feel like you're right, taking those short breaths, unable to kind of get control of that. That's normal, right? That's something that kind of we all experience in the beginning. And peripheral vasoconstriction. So the arteries and the veins that are in our peripherals, right, our arms, our legs, our hands, and our feet are going to close, right, not completely, but like kind of restrict the blood flow into those extremities so that we can keep the blood flow to our internal organs and keep the what's important running, right? Because we can survive without a finger, but we really can't survive without a heart. Especially if you, in this day and age, it might seem like that, but no, we can't. We need that heart. And then obviously there's temporary hypertension. So with that stress, right, you're going to be increasing your blood pressure. You're kind of getting into that state. And all of this is grouping under the sympathetic nervous system activation, right? Because we have two different sides of the nervous system. We have our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight, and we have our parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest, right? And for the parasympathetic nervous system, for cold water immersion specifically, you have the mammalian diving reflex, which is caused by the wetting and cooling of the face while holding your breath, right? So if you can imagine, if you've ever seen videos of like seals, like little baby seals, and they're kind of bobbing their head in the water, right? And getting this part here, and they're very calm. That's kind of where that name comes from, the mammalian diving reflex. Because if we're in this situation of diving into the cold water, if we're panicky, right, fully immersed, we're going to be in trouble. So our body knows, or it has that in ancestral intelligence, I like to say, that how to calm itself down. And how that's going to come about is by exposing the water kind of right around in the face, kind of right around this eye area by our nose, right? Really great way to kind of feel the difference of that is if you, we like to call it like a bird bath. So if the cold is a little scary for you or getting under it, you kind of just fill up your hands with a little water, right? You can put your face in it, you can splash it. Maybe you want to get like a little Tupperware of water and ice, and you just put your nose in it, right, and your face, and you hold your breath, right, because that's also part of it is the breath retention during the cold exposure to the face, the water. You're gonna feel very calm, right? It's gonna just change the way you feel right away, and so it's really great to experience too. And so that's a lot of people like kind of dunking their head right away. If you see that, right, because that's what it does, it calms you down. That's a great way to do that too. I always make sure I get this bald head in the water at some point during my exposure. So you have that, and then bradycardia, right? Just like I said, it's going to calm you down. It's going to slow your heart rate down. That's what bradycardia means. It's going to slow it down, right? We're going to get calm, right? That's what from the mammalian diving reflex. We're going to conserve our energy, like I said, right? So everything kind of goes a little quiet. That's that point where it's like ice meditation. A lot of people call it, right? Where you could feel like you get in that cold and you from the outside looking in, like you should be panicking, right? But you, as someone who've done it, or even some people who do it the first time, you kind of just tap into this place inside yourself of quiet and calm, and it's a beautiful feeling. Uh, right, increasing blood flow to the vital organs, like I said previously. When we get in the cold, the blood is going to our internal vital organs to protect that, and closing the peripheral veins and arteries. And also, too, really cool part of cold exposure as well is for performance is that you have the release of red blood cell storages from the spleen. So this is incredible, right? So red blood cells, their main function is to carry oxygen into our muscles and vital organs that need it, right? And from the constriction, right, of the spleen where you're getting to that cold water, it's going to release red blood cells, right? Which in return means you have a higher efficiency of oxygen being transported to your muscles, right? Or availability, at least at minimum, to carry oxygen to where it needs to go. So for performance wise, if you're like a distance runner, endurance, whatever it is, as we know, it comes down to like VO2 max, right? Can you get enough oxygen coming into your body? And practicing with the cold is going to increase the red blood cell count that you'll have available. So you'll have more endurance. Really beautiful stuff. And this is all falling under the parasympathetic nervous system. All right. So moving on to the next slide. Now we have other unique characteristics of cold water immersion, which is thermal regulation, right? So regulating our thermostat, right? Like the body thermostat, our temperature. And there's 6 different ways that we do this. So number one is by vasomotor regulation, which in layman terms basically just means regulating our blood pressure and our vascular resistance, right? So regulating whether or not we're going to let that blood go through to the fingers or we're going to bring that blood to conserve to the heart, right? So that's what vasomotor regulation. And for a lot of modern diseases, right, it comes down to, like, say, for heart attacks or high cholesterol, right? It's the hardening of the arterial walls, right? It's called arterial sclerosis. And that is the major cause of like heart attacks and blockages and all this really rough stuff. And getting into the ice, right, where you're intentionally inducing a vasoconstriction, right, and then coming out of the bath and inducing a vasodilation, right, the blood, that's like doing a workout for your arterial system, right? And that's what we really need to improve the symptoms that we feel from a lifestyle of bad habits, right? Or just the hardening from age, right, of the arterial wall. So it's going to keep us healthy. Number two, as I said previously, right, increasing is going to increase our basal metabolic activity. So basically what that means is we are going to burn more calories at rest. That's pretty cool, right? So you want to burn some fat, right, and lose some weight or whatever it is, get in that cold, because then you're going to be burning more calories throughout the day, even when you're just resting. Number three, right, is going to be a personal influence. It's going to be the influence of our adipose tissue, right, our fat and body mass. That's going to have a big influence on how that cold water affects you, right? If we have more insulation, if we have more body mass, a little more body fat, right, we're going to be a little less affected by the cold, right? We're going to have more insular properties in our body, whereas someone who's rail thin, right, or just not a lot of body mass, not a lot of muscle, not a lot of body fat, they're going to really feel the cold, right? It's going to really go through them. So how we are as people is going to change how that cold water affects us. So it's like a mutual relationship, which I really love about it too. Number 4 is going to be shivering thermogenesis, right? Kind of the most innate way to increase our temperature, right? When we're feeling really cold, it's the shiver, right? And so what's that doing? It's just increasing the mechanical action of our body to increase the core temperature, right? And induce heat production. So you get that from shivering, right? That's kind of the most fundamental way we can increase our core temperature and heat. And then you have non-shivering thermogenesis, right? Which is like the brown fat and the intercostal muscle interplay that I just spoke about, right? Where you're not shivering, right? But you're still producing heat through muscle action and through different systems like the brown fat activation. And there's it's incredible what your body's capable of. And it really is just like the mindset, right? And like it's even like, Wim is one of my mentors and idols, and he's always talking about interoception, right? Like being in control of your body, right? And being able to, and he goes really like far into it and deep, and really, and he talks even about how you can control where your blood flow goes, right? And he's even shown in studies that he can increase the temperature of his hands just by thinking about it, which is incredible, right? And we all have potentially this power as well, but we just have to train it, right? Wim, like, don't forget, has been doing this for like 40 years, right? So he's a pro, he's a master. We've only been exposed to this for under 10 years, really. Like maybe that if we're lucky here in the Western world. So give it some time and you really can you'll see the power of what it holds. And then finally, cold induced vasodilation. So after about 5 minutes or so of cold water immersion, if I don't know if Ed maybe has experienced it or not, we'll talk about it at the end, but you actually will increase the arteries, right, and the veins, so that blood flow starts to come into your peripheral system, and you start to feel this sensation of getting warmer, and it's like, wow, right? What is happening here? How did that come to be? But really, it's been shown that staying at least 5 minutes in that cold, if you're capable of doing that, you'll occur what's called cold-induced vasodilation and actually become warmer, right? And right away, even in that cold bath. And this is what causes a lot of times like the bright red skin when you come out of the ice bath, right? It's like the vasodilation, the blood is flowing right to the skin, because that's what's most cold, right? That's what's in contact with the cold is our skin. So there we go, right? Thermoregulation. Moving on. So now we're talking more about kind of our mindset and how to work with stress, right? Especially in our daily lives. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of just like chronic stress versus acute stress, right? Obviously, we know if we stay in the cold water, like an ice bath for a day, we're going to die, right? But if we stay in it for like a few minutes, right, like we're talking about now, that's acute stress, and that's going to be really beneficial for us. So I always like my mentor, like always says, is like any medicine can be poison and any poison can be medicine, right? And this is an amazing example of that. So knowing your limitations, right, working on the boundaries is really important, and not overdoing it at first. Stepping on from there, right, kind of you have this like three-part system of what's happening is with the acute stress, right, or any stress really, but for the good stress, right, there's a stimulus being the cold exposure, as I have in that next line there. And that's causing a response, right? And in our body, a physiological response, specific neurochemicals, as I said, are being released, right? Like the dopamine and other things. And then also, too, you have a physical response, right, from our thermoregulators, like I already said, on our skin, right, closing up right away, making sure that blood doesn't go into the peripheries and goes back into the core where it's needed. And then also too, there's going to be a psychological response, right? There's going to be that fear, right? That cold shock right away. It's going to be that fear response that's going to happen. Uh, maybe it's like this war that's going on, this challenge, right? Whatever it is, but there's going to be a certain psychological response from exposing yourself to the cold. And then from the end of that, it's the results, right? It's the change, it's the adaptation that occurs. And that's where the goal is, right? It's like that's the growth zone, is we got to get past that comfort zone and really get to that growth zone, right? Which is working with acute stress and hormesis to receive the change, right? And basically, if you guys like Gene Keys, it's like an amazing system I've been working with a little bit as well. But one of the Gene Keys he talks about is kind of this process of going from the negative to the positive, right? And there's a neutral in between, and that's the like that response, that like neutral innate that we just do, and we don't know why. So you have like a reactions, right? You have your base animalistic reactions, right? And in the middle, the neutral to creating that into a positive, right? A change is by revolutionizing the way that we react, right? We can, by exposing ourselves to situations which are going to test our reactions, right? And if we have control and we have the ability to kind of stop that for a second, right? And observe, why am I having this reaction? Why am I feeling angry? Why am I feeling stressed? Right? And we tap in, we can really find out what needs are necessary and what is unnecessary, right? What's serving us and what is no longer serving us? What can we take with us that we want to bring forward into the world, and what can we let go of? Right? You can always check your luggage at the door, right? You don't need to bring a carry-on everywhere you go, right? You could let TSA take that bag for you and relax and go through the experience, right, in a much more calm way, which is a good way to think about that. And then you rebirth into kind of like a new person, right? Once you are able to take control of your innate reactions, you're a different person, right? Because we basically are the sum of our behaviors, right? We're like the sum of our habits. That's really who we are, and what we are on a day-to-day basis. And this is all relating to the process of hormesis, right? Which I touched on before, and we're really going to get into now here. So this is a little graphic I have, kind of, that I found online that I thought pretty cool. Just talking about acute stress versus chronic stress, right? So acute stress is that sudden, short-lived, threatening event, like giving a speech, maybe it's fasting, lifting weights, right? Right now, presentation. This was a little like that acute stress. I had those butterflies coming in, but now I'm calming down, right? I'm into it, and it's good. And then we have our chronic stress, right? And that's kind of those ongoing environmental demands. So like that commute to work, right? Where I live in the New York metropolitan area, I tell you, driving to work is sometimes the most stressful part of my day. And so that takes a lot of, even now, right after all the years, I could, still feel some of that bubbling up inside. So, right, those constant chronic stresses, poor diet, right? Like I'd said, like where Uber recommends healthy food as McDonald's is going to be chronic stress in our lives for sure, right? Always, and that's terrible for us. And poor sleeping habits, right? Sleep is like being able to recharge our batteries, right? If you're running 1,000 windows in the background of your computer all night, right? There's never a chance for that computer to kind of shut down a little bit, right? You're going to wear out that battery and that shelf life real quick. Same thing goes for you. And then different things like conflicts, negativity, work stress, all those things. And then you got to see how the body, right? How the stress affects the body. So like how short-term stress affects the body and how long-term stress affects the body, right? So it's really, both of them are going to affect a lot of similar cortexes and glands of the body, right, and organs, but it's going to affect in different ways, right? So on the left is secreting adrenaline and noradrenaline, which increases our focus, right? Noradrenaline is a substance that is one of the, in a lot of ADHD medication, right? So it really helps our focus, right? That's what that's going to do, that short term, in the moment, kind of like acute stress. Whereas chronic stress is going to secrete cortisol, right? Which is going to make us feel really low energy, right? We're like storing the fat, like what's wrong? I just feel like I'm always sore all the time, these things. So that's kind of that difference there. And then on the bottom, right, you kind of see what different things that's going to happen when you're exposed to these types of stresses, right? As I said, on the acute side, increased attention, increased metabolism, faster breathing, right? And then on the other side, you're going to have like higher blood pressure all the time, right? Not temporary. It's just how it is for you. You're going to have high blood sugar levels, right? So you're not going to be able to um, bring in the glucose into where it needs to go. And so that could lead to a cascade of health benefits like type 2 diabetes, yada, 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 right? Cardiovascular diseases, and just overall, like a lot of, like all oftentimes like depression, right? And not emotionally having a well being, right? Or at least a feeling of well being that you're used to or deserve. And that comes from chronic stress. So those are two really cool graphics. And hormesis, right? So now we're at hormesis, which can be characterized as a dose response phenomenon, where limited exposure to manageable stressors result in physiological and psychological benefits, right? So this is like all we've been talking about, right? This is just like putting it all together, right? You've seen from the different slides and the talking points what that small amount of stress and working with that and overcoming that is going to do for us. And that's characterized as hormesis, right? So deliberate cold exposure is a self-directed stress inoculation and an example of hormetic stress, right? And another form of hormetic stress is like working out, right? I always like to say, right? Like you break down a little muscle at the gym, you work a little hard, you build it up on the back end, right? Or like medication, vaccines, right? These are hormetic stresses to our body so that we're able to fight off the bigger stresses that come in. So intentionally regulating exposure to stressors lead to a greater capacity of stress tolerance due to metabolic alterations, right? So all the things we've been talking about, right? How it's going to change your metabolism. It's going to open up different neural pathways for you to get in contact with, and going to be really exciting for you. And pretty much just like learning the tools to be able to move through these small discomforts, right? And it's going to teach you how to move through larger discomforts. So how you do one thing is how you do everything. All right. So the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm, right? Like man, right? So that's how it is. We're able to take the tools we learn, like in school, and apply it to the real life, right? Where there's not a rehearsal, right? This is what it is. And that's what cold water immersion does for us. We take the tools we learn from dealing with that stress and apply it to the rest of our lives. So we could really be better people and learn to govern the stress response by understanding your innate reactions to be able to revolutionize these results or these responses and rebirth into a new person. So kind of talking about how we start with our just reactions, right? And then it comes to awareness where we revolutionize these innate responses. And by doing that and accepting the necessities and characteristics of ourselves that we want to bring forward, and then letting go of the things that no longer serve us, right, and are hindering us, brings us to being a new person, right? And I think anyone that has experienced any kind of hardship or adversity in their lives know that our mess becomes our message, right? All the time, our mess becomes our message, and when we get through that, it's a really beautiful thing. So now, right, going into the conclusion here, safety first. So 2 minutes is all that is necessary, right? Feeling is understanding. So if you see here, I kind of have a chart of where hypothermia occurs, right? Different temperatures of the water. So 2 minutes, right? Not going to do really anything in regards to safety, right? You're gonna be safe. You're gonna be okay. If you don't have as well these relative contraindications, right? Like so, people with heart problems, angina pectoris, panic attacks, right? Definitely got to get doctor clearance, see how that works with it, right? You can, these are relative, right? So you can, but you need to be careful, right? You need to have guidance and you need to really be safe about it. Having high blood pressure, right? Why? Because as I told you, we're going to be increasing our blood pressure intentionally, right? So we know that's going to come. So if you already have severe high blood pressure, it might not be the best thing for you. Cold urticaria, right? It's kind of like a rash sometimes people get when they get into the cold. So it might not be good for your skin. There was some sensitivities to that. Then Raynaud's syndrome type 2, where we just don't get any blood flow to our peripheral extremities. So those are really your only contraindications, I would say. Obviously, the science behind it is all new, right? So we're learning things every day about this practice. We're learning the benefits, and also sometimes we're learning like the things that we need to be aware of, right? So for now, this is kind of, it's all relative contraindications. And I always like to say, feeling is understanding, right? Know that this is not an ego test, right? It's not a test of, oh, my ego is going to show your ego that I could do this longer than you. No, that's not the way, right? The way is, I'm going to challenge myself today so I can be a better person, right? And really, your understanding is, once you feel comfortable in that uncomfortable environment, you've done enough, right? You can step out, you can let go. And if you want to, and you're feeling really good and you want to push it a little bit, please go for it, right? But be safe about it. So really, it's just getting comfortable in that uncomfortable. And getting into some kind of practical notes here of how to do the cold exposure, right? It's a 3-step process. So step 1 is preparation, right? And visualization. So doing certain breathing exercises, right? Like I talked about with the Wim Hof method breath work, right? So changing the body chemistry, making the blood alkaline, right? Like kind of getting some of those pain relievers out so you don't feel somatically as much of the sensations are gonna help you, right? And also it's gonna calm you down, the breath work, so that you feel relaxed going into that experience. And just like I said, you can exclude the world around you, right? If anyone's like Ed knows, it's, even though you got all those people cheering you on, right? Before we get in, we're gonna have a little pep talk, right? And we're gonna check in, and we're gonna really exclude the world around us, and it's just gonna be us right before we go and how we feeling. We got this, right? We could do this. Say your mantras, whatever it is, but let's go. And setting an intention, right? It's always good to set an intention for what you're doing. Sometimes it's fun, right? Sometimes the intention is play, right, and enjoyment, and sometimes the intention is overcoming a block, right? A boundary that's been kind of there that you need to get past, right? And so there's many different intentions that you could have for doing the ice bath, but just having one is super important. Step 2, right? During the cold exposure. So now we're here. So I always say exhale and go, right? So when you're in there, connect the arms to the hand and hands to the body. It's really good. You don't want to have you see a lot of times in the ice bath, right? Kind of the hands are out here and the armpits are out. You're going to release a lot of heat through the arms, right? So you want to have those armpits tight and close. Hands to the body too. I like hands either in the armpits as well, or even under the knees, right? I feel it's, for me, very warm there. So there's different places that you could have it, but or also too, if you want to have the hands out of the ice bath, it's fine as well, right? No dogma. So like I said, exhale and begin to submerge your body into the cold water, right? So once you're ready, you exhale and go under. Now you're there, right? So now that you're in the water, focus on slow, deep inhalation through the nose and extending the exhale, right? We all know at first it's going to be the, right? And your goal is to just calm that down little by little, right? It might not happen right away, but 30 seconds of really focusing and doing that is going to really change your experience. And always like say during exhale too, I love is adding a hum, right? A little or oh. That's a great way to extend the exhale without even thinking about it, right? And then also too, that vibration is going to increase the heat production, and you're going to stimulate your vagus nerve, right? And our vagus nerve really calms us down, right? And so that's a great way to do that, is by humming. And now that you've done it, right, you're at this like 2-minute point. And when should you exit the cold emotion experience, right? So it's crucial to stay focused and pay attention. Like I said, once you feel comfortable and uncomfortable, you have accomplished the goal. Start small and build from there, right? So just start small. Even 30 seconds is better than 0 seconds, right? Everyone starts from somewhere. Don't get so hard on yourself, right? We're our own worst critics all the time. So just, you're trying something new, right? Start small and go from there. You could do it. And then step 3 is the recovery process, right? So after coming out of that ice bath, that's probably the most important part. Making sure we warm our body up, right? Doing the horse stance or other flow control movements are like creating that mechanical action to increase the heat, right? Also, too, you could do other exercises like a brown fat activation exercise was the breathwork exercise that you could do. It's very simple. It's really much for just practitioners because how it could play with your blood pressure. It has sometimes you could pass out. So definitely if you're going to do that, to be sitting down or laying down is important. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to take like 10 to 15 deep breaths right through the mouth to increase the sympathetic nervous activation. And what that's going to do, it's going to, right, you're taking the 10 breaths in, and then on the 10th one, you hold it. So like, hold and then squeeze your chest, right? Because most of your brown fat is actually located right around the collarbone area, right? And also going down the spine. So if you do that breath hold and then you squeeze your chest like really hard, right, you're going to increase your brown fat activation and get warmer. So it's only for advanced practitioners, but it is another technique that you can use for recovery. So our last slide here, a goal-oriented approach to cold water immersion. So number one is just create a variable space for continued development, right? Create a space where you could practice with this. And I say variable because you could do it anywhere. It could be outside in the lake, right? It could be inside in your bathtub with, like I said in the beginning, just putting ice cubes in there. It could be get in a serious cold tub, right? You could do it in the morning. You could do it in the evening, right? It does, whatever works best. And if you can't get in the morning, then do it in the evening, right? Like today, I had a really early day. I had to get into the gym super early for a client, so I didn't do my cold water immersion in the morning, which I normally love to do. It's my favorite time to do it. So I did it when I came home, right? So I did like 2 hours before we started here, and I feel great. So there's always different ways to reach the peak. And seek feedback, right? Internally, externally, right? Check in on yourself. How was that? How'd that feel? Am I digging this? Like, what's it all about? Externally as well. Seek out masters, right? Wim Hof method, right? Look at what Wim Hof has to say. Look at, you're here right now, so you are seeking that feedback, right? So you're already doing it. Reflect on your performance, right? That's that check-in. Explore new techniques. Like I said, with the brown fat activation, maybe with the hands, right? You could play with the hands, where that's going to be, right? Those are new techniques. Am I breathing into the nose only? Now I'm going to breathe through the mouth, right? So explore, right? Play with it once you get to a level that you feel comfortable, and set personal goals for yourself, right? Like maybe that goal is a consistency goal. Maybe that goal is a time goal. Maybe that goal is just 2 seconds every day, right? Or whatever it is. Just make sure you set a goal for yourself that you can achieve and stick to it, and be adaptable, right? It's not always good. Every environment isn't the same, right? So you have to be adaptable. A lot of times we take the uncomfortable and we try to make it into our comfort zone again, right? Like, this is the only place I can do my ice bath. I feel best here, right? I can only do it in the morning when its sun is shining, and if there's a little wind, that's not going to happen for me, right? It's like we end up doing the same thing we do for everything else, just that. So be adaptable, right? Just let the things come naturally and build the consistency from there. And finally, right, join a cold water immersion group. Practice in community. You're only going to meet like-minded people, right? And connect with others. And that's a beautiful thing, especially when you're increasing your oxytocin, right? And serotonin and endorphins and dopamine. You're going to form way more authentic connections. And I say that anecdotally from experience, but I believe it to be 100% true. So you're just going to really connect deeper with another person if you have those elevated hormones. Or participate in a Wim Hof method fundamentals course, right? So kind of like what we did with Ed down there in Pennsylvania, right? You can look on the Wim Hof website. I'm also having one, right, on Sunday. That's a little like flyer. If anyone's in the New York area, you'd like to participate, you could look me up on Instagram. My handle is Green Peak Fitness. I have my instructors page on the Wim Hof Method website where you can find me there. or just reach out to me via email or whatever it is. But most and foremost, just thank you guys for listening today. It was a long. I had said an hour, so I think I gave him like right around at that time. So I know it can be a little long, right? And maybe we're hurting a little bit from sitting in the same position. But thank you for sitting with me and listening, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Of course. And if we have any questions or